Hydroelectric energy pros and cons. Hydroelectricity has both its advantages and disadvantages. It is the most common and widely used form of renewable energy around the world. It is a flexible source of power because of the ability to change the amount of electricity being produced quickly. However, damming disrupts the natural flow of rivers, harms ecosystems and the environment, and displaces wildlife and people. Advantages of hydroelectric energy are that it is a renewable energy source that does not cause pollution like other power resources, such as burning fossil fuels. It is inexpensive in the long run, as there is minimal maintenance required for upkeep compared to other energy sources. Hydroelectricity can meet electricity demands with ease. It can be produced domestically, so it can provide its location country with power rather than it purchasing it from somewhere else. And it provides surrounding areas with clean water that can be used for irrigation for crops. Disadvantages of hydroelectric energy are that it causes significant environmental impacts, such as interrupting natural water flow, wildlife and human displacement, flooding, and disrupting migration paths of animals. Hydroelectricity is also expensive upfront to begin. There are a lot of infrastructure projects that need to occur before generating power begins. Mega hydroelectric power projects, such as the James Bay project, also rely on local hydrology to continue to operate smoothly. Droughts and weather changes can have significant impacts on the production of hydroelectric power. Hydroelectric energy has both its advantages and disadvantages. It just depends on how and where these mega power plants are implemented and built. Factors such as need, availability, and consideration of the environment and surrounding people need to be taken into account before a plant is produced. Indigenous environmental concerns today. The James Bay project is still diverting river flow and continues to have its effects on Indigenous peoples and their communities today. On top of the James Bay project, Indigenous peoples and communities are faced with other issues as well. Clean drinking water had been an issue in some Indigenous communities for years. Having clean drinking water is a basic human right, which many Indigenous people did not have. The Canadian government had stated that they would end all of the drinking water advisories by 2021. Pollution and climate change are another huge issue that Indigenous peoples have to face every day. These things affect everyone in the world, but they directly affect the way Indigenous peoples live. They rely on fishing, hunting, and the seasons in order to live the way they believe is right. When winters are not as cold as they should be, ice on oceans and lakes do not form, and polar habitats cannot properly function. Therefore, Indigenous people are unable to hunt and/or gather. Pollution has detrimental impacts on all living things on Earth. Ecosystems have become polluted, which results in animals and plants dying. Indigenous people live off of the land and all of its resources. If everything is dead or contaminated, they are unable to use those resources. The Trans Mountain Pipeline caused an uproar in 2018 when thousands of Indigenous peoples contested the expansion from Alberta to British Columbia. This expansion would see Indigenous reserved land and traditional land being disturbed. After many years of working towards reconciliation, the Canadian government backtracked when they did not see a problem in this. There had been treaties signed and mutual agreements stating these lands belong to the Indigenous peoples and they are to be untouched. Building this pipeline would have meant cutting down trees and could possibly end in the worst case scenario, an oil spill. This would devastate all Indigenous lands near the pipeline and would have a detrimental effect on the environment and all living things that inhabit the area. Indigenous peoples in northern Quebec continue to face and adapt to changes surrounding their homes and ways of life because of hydroelectric megaprojects. Because of the diversion of river flow near their communities, the Indigenous peoples' hunting and traditional ways of living have been affected. The goose hunt that takes place each spring has been directly impacted by the James Bay project. The birds stay south longer and fly elsewhere if the James Bay area is too wet. This means no resources from the birds that the locals rely on. It is not only the birds, but the fish and other wildlife too. Spawning cycles are affected, and the ability to hunt for animals underwater, such as seals, is also made more difficult because of water current changes. This mega project and the people who planned it should have considered TEK and the Indigenous peoples who lived in northern Quebec before taking initial steps. Hydroelectricity is one of the most renewable sources of power, but if that is the only advantage of it compared to all of its disadvantages, why do governments choose to produce them? The James Bay project has had countless effects on the Indigenous peoples of northern Quebec. The lack of consideration of their homes and the animals that inhabit the area is outrageous.